They sell you a story of longships and explorers, of warriors carving out new worlds with axe and sail. Almost no one talks about the other side of that axe, the price paid by the people who were already there. They especially don't talk about what happened when those ships landed at a place of God, a convent, a monastery. What happened to the women sworn to Christ when their doors were kicked in by men sworn to Odin? The chronicles call it plunder and slaughter. But for the consecrated women, the nuns and virgins of the church, the Vikings reserved a fate many considered worse than a clean death on the stones. This isn't a story of legend, it's a story of invoices, bone pits, and law codes. It's what happened when a holy vow met a slaver's chain. They say God's houses are sanctuaries. For 300 years, the raiders from the north proved them wrong. They didn't just break the walls, they broke the rules. A church wasn't just a building full of gold, it was a symbol, and the women inside, the brides of Christ, were the ultimate symbol. To take them was to spit on an enemy's God. It wasn't just about loot or lust, it was about humiliation. It was a form of psychological warfare that left scars for generations. The men were killed, the women were taken. Their holiness made them a target. Their vows made them a prize. Their capture was a message. Your God cannot protect you. We are here now. If you value documented, unvarnished history from the Norse era, subscribe to this channel. It's the best way to support our deep research. Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. This account is built on hard sources, from the clerical script of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle to the groundbreaking 2020 genetic survey of the Viking world, published in the journal Nature Our, which mapped the DNA of 442 Viking-era individuals. We deal in evidence. Now back to the story. The nightmare begins on a specific date, the 8th of June, 793. The place is Lindisfarne, a tidal island off the northeast coast of England. A holy place. This wasn't just any church, it was a royal monastery, founded by St. Aidan, home to the relics of St. Cuthbert. It was a center of power, learning, and art that produced one of the world's masterpieces, the Lindisfarne Gospels. It was the heart of the Northumbrian kingdom's faith. To attack Lindisfarne was like attacking the soul of the people, and the community there was larger than just a handful of monks. There were lay brothers, artisans, farmers, and the women and families who supported this spiritual center. It was a soft, rich, and completely undefended target. When the longships beached on the sand, the attack was a physical and a spiritual violation. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is brutally brief. It says the heathen men came, they miserably destroyed God's church, with plunder and slaughter. The scholar Alcuin of York, a Northumbrian teaching at the court of Charlemagne, was sent a report. His response is a howl of anguish. Clicks. Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race, he wrote in a letter to the king of Northumbria. The church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments. He goes on. Now click. The pagans have desecrated God's sanctuary, shed the blood of saints around the altar, laid waste the house of our hope, and trampled on the bodies of saints like dung in the street. He speaks of priests killed, but also of the survivors. He mentions our boys being led away in chains. The writers of the time, being men of the cloth, are reticent to speak of what happened to the women, but their capture was a core part of the economic model of the raid. The raiders weren't just vandals, they were merchants. And people were the most valuable cargo. For a consecrated woman, a nun from a noble family, this was the start of a journey into a world that inverted her own. Her life of prayer was over. Her vow of celibacy was about to be violently broken. The raid on Lindisfarne announced a new kind of warfare and a new kind of economy. An economy where a person's life was measured in ounces of silver, and a holy woman's soul was just another commodity to be inventoried and shipped. Her journey would not end on the blood-soaked sand of the island. It would end in a slave market hundreds of miles from home. From the shores of England, she would be chained in the stinking, cramped belly of a longship. She was now cargo. No different from the stolen church, silver, or bundles of furs. The journey itself was a filter. The weak would die from exposure, disease, or despair. Those who survived were taken to the new Viking boomtowns, the hubs of this vast human trafficking network. The largest slave market in the British Isles was Dublin. The Norse called it Dyflin. Founded as a fortified naval camp, a long fort, around 841, it became the nexus for a terrifyingly efficient system of raiding and trading. From this base, Viking parties would push deep into the Irish interior, raiding monasteries like Clonmacnoise and Glendalough, taking books, gold, home, and people. The Annals of Ulster, for the year 821, simply states, Ecbert, king of the English, harried the kingdom of the Welsh, and from that day on, they were his subjects. The reality was raids, theft, and enslavement. Archaeologists digging at Wood Quay and Fishamble Street in modern Dublin have literally unearthed the tools of this trade. They found the slave chains, not just simple manacles, but heavy, sophisticated iron collars with long leading chains, designed to bind 5 or 6 people together at the neck. They found shackles, but they also found the proceeds of the trade: hack silver, scales for weighing payment, and coins from across the known world, silk from Byzantium, consecrated, amber from the Baltic, walrus ivory from Greenland. All of it flowed through Dublin, paid for with the lives of captives. A nun from Lindisfarne, or a highborn woman taken from a French convent, was a luxury good. Her literacy, her noble birth, her religious status, these were all selling points that increased her price. She would be a thrall. The word in Old Norse denotes the lowest possible status a human could hold. A free peasant was a carl. A freed slave was a legimator, still bound by obligations, but a thrall was chattel. The Icelandic law code, the Gragaskidus, compiled in the 12th century but reflecting much older legal traditions, is chillingly precise. A thrall had no legal standing. They could not testify in court. They could not own property. They had no weregild. The man price, or blood money paid to a family if a free person was killed. If you killed a free man, you owed his family a fortune in silver. If you killed a thrall, you owed his owner the replacement cost. It was a property crime. Your master could beat you, starve you, work you to death, or kill you for his own amusement, and he would answer to no one. And for a female thrall, this lack of personhood extended to her body. Sexual access was an owner's right. It was not rape, it was use of property. Any child she bore was born into slavery. Her sentence was hereditary. Her capture wasn't a single act of violence. It was the foundation of a multi-generational curse, a theft of her future and her children's future. Not every woman accepted this fate. There is a story, a chilling one, from the year 870. The great heathen army was tearing England apart. They were moving south, a plague of violence and destruction. In their path stood the double monastery of Coldingham, led by Abbess Ebbe the Younger. She knew the raiders were coming. She knew their reputation. The story, recorded by Matthew Paris in the 13th century, needs to be handled with care. A gap of nearly 400 years means details could be exaggerated or even invented to serve a later purpose, creating a tale of Christian martyrdom. But the story he tells is so specific, it has become a legend of desperate resistance. Abbess Ebbe gathered her nuns. She told them that their lives were forfeit, but their vows were not. She held up a razor. In front of her terrified sisters, she sliced off her own nose and her upper lip, turning her face into a bloody, unrecognizable mask. She commanded them to do the same, to make themselves objects of horror rather than objects of lust. According to the Chronicle, every single nun did as she asked. When the Vikings, led by the chieftains Ivar the Boneless and Ubba, smashed down the doors, they were met with a scene from a nightmare. The women they had come to rape and enslave were self-mutilated, bleeding, and defiant. The raiders' desire turned to pure rage. They were denied their prize, so they denied the nuns a quick death. They sealed the doors, set fire to the monastery and burned everyone inside alive. Whether the story is literal truth or pious legend, it illustrates the extremity of the choice these women faced, a horrific death or a life that many considered worse. It shows a world where the ultimate act of defiance was to destroy the very thing the attackers wanted most. If you find this level of historical detail compelling, take a moment to subscribe. Our goal is to uncover the truth of the past, no matter how uncomfortable. Tell us where you're from in the comments. The evidence for this dark trade isn't just in old books. A 2009 archaeological report by Linus Gardell from the Swedish National Heritage Board detailed finds from the Viking trading town of Birka. Among the graves, they found individuals whose chemical isotopes showed they didn't grow up in Sweden. They came from Western Europe, from the lands the Vikings raided. They were foreigners, buried in a strange land far from the homes they were stolen from. Now, back to the evidence. The Vikings' reach extended far beyond the British Isles. Their trade routes, powered by stolen people, were intercontinental. An Irish nun captured near Dublin could be sold in the market there, shipped to Hedeby in southern Denmark, and then begin an even more arduous journey. From the Baltic coast, she would be rowed up the rivers of what is now Russia, the Vistula, the Dnieper, the Volga. These weren't easy passages. The ships often had to be emptied and dragged for miles overland on log rollers at portages between river systems. All along the way, they faced dangers, like attacks from Pecheneg horse nomads on the Dnieper rapids, a threat vividly described by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII in his book De Administrando Imperio. For a captive who survived all this, the final destination was Constantinople, which the Norse called Miklagard, the great city, or the markets of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Here, she would be sold again, her value increasing with the distance she had traveled. She was now an exotic prize from the far northwest. The 10th century Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan, traveling north, met a group of these Rus Vikings on the Volga River. His written account, his Risala, is an unflinching, disgusted look at their culture. He describes them as the filthiest of God's creatures, but also as perfect physical specimens, tall as date palms. He details their trading camp, filled with furs and female slaves, the Jariya, and he witnessed what happened when one of their chieftains died. A young slave girl volunteered, or was volunteered, to be sacrificed and buried with him. The ritual that followed was a 10-day-long nightmare of ritualized abuse. She was passed from tent to tent, forced to drink alcohol and have sex with the dead chief's lieutenants. On the day of the funeral, she was brought to the ship that would serve as his pyre. There, she was symbolically married to her dead master. Then she was held down by 2 men, while 2 others pulled a rope tight around her neck. An old woman, a ritual specialist they called the Angel of Death, repeatedly stabbed her between the ribs with a dagger. Finally, they laid her body next to her master's and set the entire ship on fire. Ibn Fadlan's account is a rare, graphic eyewitness testimony to the absolute disposability of a female slave. Her life, her body, her death, none of it belonged to her. The profits from this trade were astronomical. This is not speculation. It is proven by numismatics, the study of coins. Tens of thousands of silver dirhams, minted in places like Samarkand and Baghdad, have been found in Viking hordes across Scandinavia. The Spillings hoard, discovered on the Swedish island of Gotland in 1999, contained over 14,500 silver coins, the vast majority from the Islamic world. It weighed 67 kilograms. That is the payment for countless lives, trafficked down the rivers of the East. Every coin is a receipt for a human soul. The evidence for this world is also written in bone. The mass grave at Repton in Derbyshire, the winter camp of the Great Heathen Army from 873, that holds the remains of at least 264 people. The majority are fighting-age men, many with brutal injuries, but among them are women. For years, the assumption was that they were local women who had died alongside the Vikings. But modern science tells a different story. Strontium isotope analysis, which matches the chemical signature in your tooth enamel to the geology of the region where you grew up, proves many of them were from Scandinavia. A study led by archaeologist Kat Jarman revealed that women were part of this army, some even buried with weapons. This complicates the picture. It proves Norse women were not all passive homebodies. Some were participants in the Great Migrations. But this doesn't erase the fate of the captive. It simply highlights the brutal stratification of their society. For every high-status Norse woman who died with the army, there were innumerable thralls whose bones we will never find, discarded in unmarked pits. We do see glimpses of them. Excavations in Viking era. Dublin uncovered the skeleton of a woman tossed in a ditch. Isotope analysis showed she grew up in northern England. Her bones showed signs of a life of hard labor and poor nutrition. She was a captive, worked to death and thrown away like garbage. This is the unglamorous reality. For every saga hero, there were dozens of slaves whose stolen labor built his world. The end of a raid was just the beginning of the ordeal for a captured nun. Her identity was systematically dismantled. Her Christian name was replaced with a Norse one, or a demeaning nickname like Ambat, a generic term for a female servant. Her language, her prayers, her songs, all suppressed. Her faith was the subject of open mockery in a world where her God had proven powerless. The psychological trauma of this transition is unimaginable. Her previous life was one of strict order, contemplation, and community. Her new life was one of brutal labor, constant uncertainty, and the ever-present threat of sexual violence. Her entire spiritual framework was shattered. Her body, which she had consecrated to God, was now the property of a man who worshipped Thor and Odin. It was the ultimate violation, an act of spiritual and physical domination that lasted a lifetime. And this system endured for 3 centuries, from Lindisfarne in 793, through the Viking settlements in Iceland and Greenland, the founding of the great slave market in Dublin, the establishment of the Danelaw in England, and the creation of the Kievan Rus in the East. The engine of the Viking Age was fueled by the relentless capture and trade of human beings. It began to decline only in the 11th and 12th centuries as the Scandinavian kingdoms slowly converted to Christianity, which, at least in principle, forbade the enslavement of fellow Christians. The flow of Arab silver dried up, the great markets faded. But the legacy was already written into the social fabric, the law codes, and the very blood of the people. For centuries, the story was told only by the men who wrote the chronicles. The victims were silent. Their names and their suffering were lost. We knew the Vikings took slaves, but it was an abstract concept. We couldn't see the true scale of it. We couldn't trace the impact on the generations that followed. But in the 21st century, a new kind of archaeology has given these silent women a voice, not by digging in the dirt, but by digging into our own DNA. The largest ever genetic study of Viking remains was published in the journal Nature in September of 2020. An international team of scientists, led by Professor Eske Willerslev, sequenced the genomes of 442 human remains from Viking-era sites across Europe and Greenland. Their findings were a revolution. They proved conclusively that Viking was never a pure ethnicity. It was a job description, a multicultural enterprise. But the most powerful revelation came from tracking the flow of genes. The study revealed a massive directional influx of foreign DNA into Scandinavia during the Viking Age. Specifically, they found a significant flow of female ancestry from the British Isles and the eastern Baltic moving into Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. This pattern was even more pronounced in colonial settlements. The Viking-era graves in Iceland and Greenland show a founding population composed largely of Norse men and Gaelic women. The genetic evidence is the final, irrefutable proof. The men went out to raid, and they brought the women back. Not as wives, but as thralls, as concubines. As the unwilling mothers of the next generation, the genetic landscape of modern Scandinavia was permanently altered by the women who were stolen from places like Lindisfarne. Their fate was not a quick death on the altar. It was to be taken, enslaved, and forced to bear children for their captors. Their story didn't end in the flames of their convent. It continued in the genes of their descendants. Their prayers were silenced. Their names were erased, but their bloodline endured.